So good evening, everyone. It is so nice to be in the room with you all. Isn't this fun? It's definitely much better getting back. As I have two children, as those of you who've heard me speak before will know, who are now, let me work this out, now they are nearly 11, nearly 18. And thank you so much for saying that I'm interesting and easy to listen to, because they really would not agree with that. And are frequently amazed that people actually want to come and spend an evening in a room with me, listening to me, giving good advice, because they are not so caught on that. Anyway, welcome, thank you. If you haven't heard me speak before, then I would normally start with a Kate Middleton joke, but at the moment the whole Royals thing is a little bit uncomfortable. I did actually took my son for an eye appointment the other day, and somebody did ask me, did I really not like Meghan? And I've said, I've actually not met her, but there we go. So I am a psychologist by background, as Ali has said. I'm also a church leader, and I've been working in the church for over 2 decades now, which gives away how old I am slightly. I also have 2 children, 2 cats, a puppy, which is a really bad idea. If anybody's thinking of getting one, don't. We'll come back to that when we're talking about worry later. I'm also one of the directors of a national organisation called the Mind and Soul Foundation, and we are passionate about mental and emotional health and well-being, and encouraging people in what have been some really quite challenging times. And what we're passionate about in that is not just the sticky end of mental and emotional health when you become ill. We are passionate about that, supporting people, talking to community groups, churches, schools, universities, organisations about how do you support people when they're struggling with mental and emotional health. But we're also really passionate about the question of what it means to live life well. You know, is it possible to survive or maybe even thrive and flourish in difficult times, in tough times? And so that's something that I love to talk about a lot, because life is complicated, isn't it? You know, and particularly in the last couple of years, it has been difficult. And if we look at media reports, sometimes we might feel like we're basically doomed to struggle, that our kids are maybe doomed to struggle. And what I want to suggest to you, I'm not going to deny that life is difficult, but we are not helpless in the face of those challenges. And that's why I want to talk to you tonight about worry. Did you know the most common emotion to cause problems is anxiety, and worry is its close relative? So many people struggle with worry. Our media fuels our worry because worry and anxiety grab our attention. So stories that trigger worry and anxiety, we're more likely to read them, we're more likely to remember them, and we're more likely to share and retell those stories. So people talked a lot, didn't they, in the pandemic about doom scrolling. You know, when you're sitting looking through your phone and it's just one piece of bad news after another, after another, after another. I remember looking through the newspaper headlines several months ago when we were just starting to realize the enormity of the financial crisis that we were going to hit as we moved into the winter, and seeing a headline that literally was, "Should I worry about?" and then like a list of things. You're like, oh my goodness, this is so helpful now. I can read these articles that will tell me the things that I'm not worrying about, just so that I know that I should be worrying about them. I'm also married to a professional worrier. My husband is a lawyer. It is his job to worry about things so you don't have to, or that's what he would say. But he literally sits in bed and has been known several times to be sitting there looking worried, and I say to him, "You're worrying. What are you worrying about?" And he says, "I'm worried because I'm not worrying, and I probably should be." So the question is, how do we manage worry in times when, frankly, there is a lot that we might want to be worrying about? There are so many issues, so many potential things that might be the next disaster that we're supposed to deal with. How do you deal with worry? That's the question. And what I want to share with you tonight is some tips from a whole range of different perspectives, some from psychology, neuroscience, thinking about how the brain works, how your wonderful mind works, and also some ancient wisdom, because I am a church leader. And I want to share with you some tips also that come from a letter that was written centuries and centuries ago, which is actually a letter from the New Testament written by a guy called Paul. And it's interesting in the context of worry because it's a letter he wrote at a time he was under real pressure. You know, we forget sometimes that these biblical texts were written by people who were just normal human beings like us. They lived in a different world with different struggles, but emotionally the impact was very similar. And Paul went through a lot of time of difficulty, of challenge. He walked away from a lot of the things in his life that would have offered security to him. So things were very uncertain. And he writes this letter at a time when he's actually in prison. And he knows that he's likely to be executed. So it's kind of probably not going to end well for him. So he has some things to worry about. And it's interesting, the things I want to share are a section of a letter that he writes where he's basically giving advice. How do you handle this stuff? And what he says at the beginning of that section is advice on how to stand firm. And it's a Greek phrase that literally means how do you hold your ground? How do you stay standing when there is so much going on that could throw you off balance? How do you hold your nerves in times when actually there's so much that could just make you lose your mind with the worry of it all? What do you do when worry feels like it's relentless? You know, one of the challenges with worry is when it becomes something that isn't a choice. You know, we joke about it with my husband, and he does love to worry, but that's a choice. He can walk away from it. Sometimes we have moments where worries become impossible to escape, and it feels like they're hounding us. They've become relentless. When worry is like that, it affects your whole life. It affects how you feel, how you interact with other people. It affects your focus because your mind is so distracted with all these things spinning around in it that you can't think straight. You can't make good decisions, which, by the way, is another thing to worry about. And so it can become very quickly a vicious cycle. And I'm hearing people so weighed down by that at the moment. Even as we've come out of the crazy pandemic phases, as we move forward into a world that just feels really uncertain, there is so much to worry about. And I'm hearing a lot of people talking about how difficult that is and the impact of it. Did you hear about this phenomenon of quiet quitting? That this thing of what you do when you just kind of can't take it anymore, so you just have to start to opt out. And an interesting question to ponder right at the start of this evening is which is more likely to have a negative impact on your life? The things you're worrying might happen, or the worry that is going to catch you in its grip and hold you back and limit you and steal the joy from you. And it's an interesting phenomenon that actually, if you look at studies that ask people about their worries and then come back to them later and say, that thing you were worrying, do you remember we talked to you about the thing you were worrying about? Did it happen? Two things are really interesting. Number one is most of the things you worry about don't actually happen. This is true. Some of you are like, no, most of your worries don't actually happen in the way that you're worrying they might. But what's even more interesting is even when they do, even when you talk to people where the worst did happen, the worst case scenario they were dreading did happen, very often they will say actually dealing with the reality of it was not as bad as anticipating it. Because when we worry about something that isn't here, isn't in the present yet, we can't do much about it. So our sense of control and our sense of being able to change things is very difficult. Uncertainty is one of the most difficult things for the human mind to cope with. And it's one of the most triggering things for emotions like anxiety. So I want to start this evening with something that might be a little bit disappointing. So if I start now, if this is just like, right, well, I'm wasting my time this evening, you've still got time to leave, which is that I am not going to share with you a magic solution tonight for how to eliminate all worry from your mind. The reason is because worry and anxiety are actually essential human emotions, human cognitive skills. Your brain needs to be able to do those things. So anxiety in particular, its job is to act like a smoke alarm, to grab your attention and focus it on something. If you might need to react, you might need to do something. You know, life is complicated. There's a lot going on. How do you not miss something you might really need to respond to prevent that worst case scenario? If there's an uncertainty, if there's a possibility something might go badly wrong. And worry is the sort of cognitive, the brain process that's tied up in that anxiety. Anxiety does lots of things. If you want to hear more about anxiety, dial back in time online and listen to the talk that I gave frighteningly numbers of years ago about that, because anxiety hasn't changed, so it's not out of date. But what anxiety does, it sets you up physically to respond in case you need to. It grabs your attention and then it triggers your analytical mind to focus on that thing. And ultimately, to make a decision, do you need to do something or not? What do you need to do? But the main thing is it's like narrowing the focus on the lens of a camera down to the thing that you really need to attend to or possibly need to attend to. So that over-focused, almost slightly obsessive thinking pattern that is worry is actually part of a very constructive, very important part of how your brain works. So worry is designed to be constructive. The problem is not worry, therefore. The problem is what happens in seasons where there is a lot to worry about, or the things we're worrying about feel very out of our control, or they're very distant, things that are in the future, or things that are very, very uncertain. Another time worry often becomes a problem is in times of stress. One of the interesting things biologically about this emotional subset that includes anxiety and worry is that it operates on the same physiological system as stress. So to put that in simple terms, if you imagine the baseline on that system, if your stress level is already quite high, stress, another topic that you can dial back in time and listen to another talk on, but if your stress level is already quite high, and that doesn't mean that life is necessarily nasty or difficult, it could just be complicated in wonderful ways. Lots going on, lots of new things, lots of change or challenge, things like that. But if your stress level is quite high, it's like the water level in your bath is already pretty high, and then the next drips or someone turns the tap on, it doesn't take a lot for it to start to overflow. And so we can be pushed into a zone where we feel overwhelmed, where our anxiety and our emotional state feels like it might be overreacting because our baseline was already high. So I can't avoid my head going to lots of puppy analogies because that's what is going on at home at the moment. Although he's quite old. He's actually an adolescent. Did you know dogs have adolescents? Why did no one tell me this before I got a puppy? I just feel I have not looked into this in enough detail before I started. Anyway, they talk about trigger loading with dogs. So it's like normally they could cope with the thing that's in front of them, but they already coped with so much already. They have no emotional capacity left and they're going to go into a complete frenzy. I feel like that sometimes too. Do you? It's like I have no capacity left to deal with this right now, and it is a genuine thing. So in those times, frequently, people will talk about suddenly starting to really struggle with worry, with not being able to switch their mind off, with feeling constantly slightly anxious. And that's such a nuisance, because often those are seasons in life where you really feel the need to try and be an emotionally stable version of yourself. And actually what you feel is just destroyed by the level of worry, exhausted because you can't rest, pulled in 100 different directions, trying to remember everything you've got to worry about, but still forgetting things, messing things up, making mistakes because your brain just feels like it's all over the place. When you get into that emergency zone, your brain doesn't function as well as it normally does. These moments can be like a worry grenade. You feel like you were doing okay, but then something happens, and for some reason, your brain just goes into this zone of worry. And then you feel trapped, like a round and round obsessive cycle of things going through your head that you can't deal with, you can't change, and that can feel really exhausting and overwhelming. Like suddenly that water level has gone over your head, you're drowning in the weight of everything. One thing we talked a lot about throughout the whole pandemic was overwhelm. These moments when that grenade has gone off in your head and suddenly you were actually doing okay, but just suddenly it feels too much. And in those moments, your brain tries to get you to bail, to get out of the situation. So things feel worse than they actually are. You can't think straight. Your mind goes very binary, so it sees everything as either one thing or another, black or white, good or bad, success or failure. And the problem is in those moments, because your anxiety level is high and your brain is looking for problems just in case you might need to deal with them, it can feel like the negative one of each of those choices. So you were already having a tough day, but suddenly everything feels bad. You are a complete failure. Everybody is against you. It's all a disaster. And then the worry grenade goes off and your brain starts buzzing like it's looking for things to worry about. The weight of worry can sometimes feel overwhelming. And some people, their minds are particularly good at worrying. So like my husband, who's the professional nitpicker / lawyer. And some people in this room will know that. They've got the kind of minds that just notice things. Other people, less so. They're much more relaxed, more chilled out. Some people are details people. Some people have a more perfectionist mind. They're more likely to spot things. Some people's anxiety is more easily triggered than others. Sometimes you've had experiences in your past or, as I say, stressful moments in your present. And they can make you more prone to worrying in the moments when you least want to be that version of yourself. So, having all told you that worry is inevitable and there's no way you'll, escape it, the good news, I am going to share with you some tips. But what I want you to understand this evening is that the problem isn't really that you're worrying. That's sort of, it's kind of a given. Human beings do that. We're analytical people. It is a good thing, honestly. The problem is how you're worrying. The problem is when you're worrying and what you're doing about it and the degree to which you feel like worry has taken over and you've lost control. That sense of feeling a victim in the face of relentless, exhausting worry. So what I want to say to you tonight, which may surprise you, is stop trying not to worry. You know, that is the least helpful thing people can say to you, isn't it? Have you had someone say, oh, yeah, you're stressed out about that. Don't worry about it. Like, oh, great, thank you so much. I can't believe you've just shared that piece of wonderful wisdom with me. I will just go on with my day light and carefree now because you've told me not to worry. No, so I'm not going to tell you to stop worrying. What I am going to tell you to do is to learn to worry better. Because that's actually the key. Stop fighting with your brain and trying to change the way it's set up to work. And actually, let's try and think, how do we hold these moments when worry becomes a problem? How do we worry better? So we're going to talk about 5 top tips. I have the attention span of a gnat usually, so I like to do things in numbers. So if you zone out or if I get boring, you can just have a little nap, and then when I start the next number, you can like re-engage. So you listen to one of those talks where you stop listening and then you just know this is it, you've had it now, because the whole thing is just one long trail of thought, and you're never going to get back into it. This is not going to be a talk like that, so that's good news. 5 top tips that we're going to go through this evening about how to manage worry. So here is tip number 1, and it's this: plan to worry. You're going to do it anyway, so you might as well plan to do it well. Let's recognize and remember the job of worry is to get your attention. Now, I have had small children. My children are less small now. I have the puppy. Those of you who may still have small children or have babysat small children, their job very often is to get your attention. Now, tell me, if you just ignore that small child when it's being sort of whiny and annoying or the puppy barking, does it go away? No. I thought the puppy would, but it turns out it really doesn't. If their job is to get your attention and you ignore them, they very often ramp up what they're doing. So what's better is to manage the need well and to learn some good strategies and skills to deal with the issue that's underneath it. So often the problem with worry is that people's main strategy to deal with it is just to try not to do it. La, 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 let's just try not to think about it, try and get on with things, and hopefully it'll just go away. And it doesn't. It's like trying to hold a beach ball under the water when you go on holiday. You know, the more you're trying to push it down, the more it sort of pops up unexpectedly somewhere you were least expecting it. Worry has a purpose in your mind. It's trying to alert you to something, and if you try and ignore it, it will probably get your attention another way. So instead, what we need to do is try to build walls around our worry, to create spaces where we can do worry well, so that we're reassuring our brains like we're not ignoring this, we've got it, we are on it, but we're just not going to think about it for the entire day and night. So what does this look like? Creating some sensible spaces where you can worry, planning ahead to do it. You know, in that letter that I was talking to you about, which is written by Paul, written in Greek, his top tip about worry is don't do it. He starts out saying, do not worry, do not be anxious, depending on which translation you read. Actually, what he does is he uses this really beautiful Greek word. And what it literally means is it describes a very specific kind of worry where there are so many different things on your mind, so many things that your brain is trying to alert you to and divert your focus to, so many things you're trying to keep track of and not drop and not make a mess of, that it feels like your mind is pulled in all these different directions. It's like you're pulled apart by the worry. You're torn apart. You're in pieces. And what he's saying is don't get to that point. Don't let your worries ambush you. Be proactive. Don't just try and stick your head in the sand and hope it will magically go away. Instead, plan in every situation to do something with it. So schedule your worry. Think about time in your day when you can do it, but do it well. You know, I've discovered through enforced dog walking that actually having that space every day is quite good for me because I do have some space to think about things. And what it does is it kind of frees my brain up the rest of the time because I know I'm going to have time later when I can actually focus on something and mull it over and try and decide, do I need to do something about it? So we get away from worry that's like the sort of anxious, hyperactive, toddler tantrum child and become something that we have created space for. So we're more in control, there's more space, and some of the tension has gone out of it. Let me just say on this one, before we move on, that actually denial is actually quite a good and constructive and mature strategy sometimes for worry. So I'm not saying that's always a bad thing. And actually, as adults, we need sometimes to be able to put things to the back of our minds, get on with something else, deal with that later. But that's exactly what you're doing because you know that you have got a space later to deal with it. So it stops your brain having to bounce it to the top all the time. You know, on computers where sometimes, those of you who have Macs, not PCs, will know exactly what I mean. Sometimes on the little bar at the bottom, things literally bounce to try and get your attention, yeah? You know that? Worry sometimes is a bit like that, because if you haven't created a space to deal with it, it will sort of bounce in your brain, like, hello, remember me, remember this thing you're trying not to think about. So if you create space for it and schedule it and plan it, it will actually help. So yes, I know I'm telling you to deal with worry by worrying not more, but more directly. That's number one. Number two, then, is what you do in those scheduled, planned spaces. And that's this. Get it out of your head. Do you remember, in the Summer Olympics, because we're all over the place now with what year these things happen in, aren't we? And it's very confusing. We're playing football at Christmas. Olympics are got the wrong year attached to them. It's very, very confusing. But you remember those, the shot put, where they spin round. I'm not going to do it now, but where they spin round and round with the heavy ball thing. Sometimes worry is like doing that, but we forget to let go of it. And we just spend the rest of the day spinning around. And that doesn't really get us anywhere. Actually, what you need to do is work out a way to get your worries out of your mind. The things with worry is that it's a bit like when you get flies in the room. If they're just buzzing around inside your head, they sort of trying to get your attention. They sort of get more and more buzzy and irate and irritating, and it becomes difficult to ignore them. It becomes difficult to do anything else. You need to open the window, let them out so you can get some headspace and some clarity and escape them. So when you've created your scheduled space where you've planned to worry, what you do in that space is something that helps you empty your brain out. Have you ever been to the supermarket and you've got to buy 5 things? Yeah, now we can go to the supermarket again. Remember the days that was really exciting? Look, I'm in the supermarket, what shall I buy? It's not exciting anymore. But you've gone and you've got to get some of these things, and you've got them in your head, and then you walk in, you can't remember any of them. The only way to do it is to keep reciting them to yourself. And you're walking around the supermarket going, bread, milk, eggs, peas, butter, whatever it is you're buying. I don't know what I'm cooking, but you're just reciting it again and again, because otherwise you know what will happen. You will forget something essential, you'll just get into the car to go home, and then you'll remember it. And you have to go back in and stand in the queue again, and it's a nuisance. That's your working memory. You're trying to hold things at the front of your mind, and your working memory requires, the clues in the name, work for you to keep things actively at the front there. When your worries are in your head, in order to make sure that you're paying attention to them and to keep them in the zone where you can hopefully your mind is trying to get you to process and analyze them. Effectively, what it does is keeps moving them back into your working memory. So you're thinking about them again and again and again, even when you don't want to be. It's the opposite of the supermarket when you're trying not to forget things. In this space, you're wishing you could forget them, but your brain just keeps pushing them back to the top of your mind. If you can release them from your mind in a positive way, what you do is allow your brain to say, actually, I can let this go now, because it's covered, it's dealt with. It doesn't need to keep bouncing it back to the top of your agenda when actually you're trying to get on with other things. So when we empty our brain, when we do something with our worries, that's what you're doing. You're releasing, you're giving your mind permission to let go of something. Next bit of Paul's advice in this letter is he says we should present our requests. One of the translations has him saying that we should tell someone every detail of our life. It's that huge release of being able to unpack your brain somewhere and get the relief and the release of not having to hold all of that inside your skull anymore. You know, some of us in this room, the reason that we feel weighed down by worry is because of the sheer amount of stuff that we're holding. You know, there are seasons in life that you hit, not through any fault of yours, but just through the natural rhythm of life, where you become the person who is supposed to solve and hold things for an awful lot of other people. Maybe at work, you're holding quite a lot of responsibility, but you're not the ultimate boss, so you're not able to make the big decisions, you just have to make them happen. Anybody in that space? Yeah. At home, particularly if you've got kids or you're supporting elderly relatives or caring for other people, you're the person who holds a lot of that stuff. You have to be the solution person, and you have to protect other people sometimes from other things, so you're not able to share everything with everyone. It's just the nature of your role. Some roles in particular, professionally, train people to be really good at holding things in their mind. So people who work in caring professions, medics in the room, teachers. There are several roles that require you to be really good at holding stuff in your head. The problem is that often then equates when you get home to struggling with worry. Because you're spending so much time building the skills of holding it in your head that you haven't been able to build the skills of releasing it and letting go, and you're caught in the eternal shot put spin of worry. So instead, schedule some space and then think about, where do I release the details of my life? Where do I let this stuff go? And there's lots you can do. Think about it. I often think it's a bit like playing tennis, this stuff, and there's lots of different ways you can play tennis. And I know you're thinking, actually, that's not true, Kate. There's only really a few ways you can play tennis. There are lots of ways. So think, firstly, you can play tennis on your own. No, you can. Remember when you were a kid and you used to just hit the ball against a wall and it would really drive people mad? My son did this with a football all the way through the first lockdown on my office wall. Really quite annoying. I'm trying to work or I'm on a live stream and all I can hear is Anyway, the equivalent of doing that for worry, how can you process things on your own? How can you get them out of your head? You can just create space to do it. Go for a walk. Create headspace and calm. Schedule those spaces like we've talked about. You can use the other skills of your mind to help you process things in a different way, so you can write things down. You can listen to podcasts or read stuff that just helps you maybe get a different perspective or process in some way the things that you're holding. You can speak it out. You can do that on your own. It's probably best to do it somewhere lonely or an empty house, otherwise people sometimes feel a little alarmed. But you can talk stuff out. When we push the things in our head out through writing them down or speaking them, we process them in an additional way, and it often really, really helps. And helping isn't just about finding a magic solution that makes it all go away. Helping is releasing the pressure that your brain feels to keep reminding you of it, because you haven't paid enough attention to something that could be important. So if you're creating that headspace to do that and then you're doing something that helps you process it, it releases some of the pressure of your worry. Of course, another good way of playing tennis is with someone else. That's probably the usual way to play tennis. And that's true with worries too. You know, we can bounce them off someone else. We can get a good mate, someone who we trust, someone we feel comfortable with. And just knock the ball about a bit. What's really important about that space that I think people often underestimate is that doesn't require the other person to suddenly become an amateur therapist or a not amateur therapist, a really good one. If you're the person at the other end of that conversation, sometimes you can feel that pressure. Oh my goodness, I've got to somehow solve this. I can't solve any of it. No, all you have to do to be a good rally partner in tennis is knock the ball back. Keep a rally going. And that's what you're doing, just helping someone talk and process and get it out of their head. How does that make you feel? That feels really rubbish. What happened next? What about this other thing? I remember you saying you had this doctor's appointment come in. How did that go? Just helping people get it out of their minds. And we underestimate the power of those spaces very, very often. You know, meeting up with friends, doing all the things that we now can do again, going out for coffee, going for a drink, going for a walk with friends, whatever works for you. Find those people, create those spaces because it's really helpful. Of course, the third way is that sometimes we do all need a coach. We need someone who's got that extra bit of skill, who can help us work through something analytically, who can maybe guide us through something that's emotionally really tough, or where the threat of a situation that we're worrying about feels so huge that every time you try and think about it, you just go into panic. Sometimes we need that kind of guidance. And of course, that's where therapists, counselors, psychotherapists, psychologists, all these people can become really, really valuable. So don't underestimate those either, but remember that it doesn't always need to be someone with that degree of skill who's on the other end of the conversation. Share your worries with someone else. Don't try and hold it all by yourself. Okay, number 3 is this. Sleep on it. Now, I know some of you are like, yeah, great, thanks very much. I would love to get a good night's sleep. Can't remember the last time I had one of those. And I'll be honest with you here, the Paul letter doesn't really mention sleep, but I think he would have liked to. Because it is such a huge problem. And I know when I come and talk to people about worry, anxiety, stress, pretty much anything we talk about, what will come up is, have you got any tips on how to sleep? I'm really struggling. And the thing is that if you're not sleeping well, almost everything else gets worse, doesn't it? If you're exhausted and your mind is just struggling, we become less good at holding our emotions well. We become more haunted by things that perhaps wouldn't normally bother us. And issues around anxiety can start to feel much, much bigger and scarier. The other problem, though, with sleep, when it comes to worry specifically, is, trust me, nothing feels worse than when you're thinking about it at 3 a.m. Yeah? When everybody else is asleep or snoring, it's pitch black, and you're just lying there worrying about something. There's nothing you can do about it at 3 a.m, almost always. And so you're literally just going round and round and round in that process. The thing with sleep, the number one issue with it, I'm not sure what you guys are saying, if we can flick to the cartoon yet. I want to ask you, when can your brain get your attention? So some of us are holding a lot in our minds. There's a lot going on. Your brain is trying to keep track of a lot of things. There's a lot of things it wants to alert you to, find space to make sure you think about. When in your day can it do it? Because remember I said it's not helpful if your only strategy for worry is just to try not to think about it, distract yourself, carry on with other things. What very often happens is that finally you get to the end of the day, you are exhausted, you've had the worst day, you are done, you get into bed, you lie down, and you want beautiful, tranquil sleep. Your brain, meanwhile, is like, yes, finally I have your attention. And that's when it all comes up. That's when you suddenly start thinking of things. And sometimes this can be helpful. Sometimes we have good thoughts at night. We remember things that we do need to remember. But the problem is if that stuff is keeping you awake, because there is so much that your brain needs the space to ponder. And if you don't create the space in the day, it will demand space when you actually want to switch off and go to sleep. So think about that. Tip 1 and 2 about scheduling space, doing something really constructive and helpful with that space is really important if you're finding that your worries are keeping you awake at night. And lots of things keep us awake at night. So not everyone who struggles with sleep will be the brain buzzing, I can't switch off sort. But in general, if we can lower our level of worry and anxiety, your mind will find it easier to release itself into sleep at night. So most of the solutions for sleep are actually about things you do in the daytime to prepare you better for a space at night when you can switch off. But sleep is such a big issue. Let me do a rattle through a really quick, like 5 within 5. So 5 thoughts about sleep. So number 1 is this the only time your brain can get your attention? Do you need to create some intentional space in your daytime, in your week, in your rhythm, where you actually really think about something that honestly you might really not particularly want to think about? Because that may release your mind at night. Number 2 is about what they call sleep hygiene. Can you do the things that clean your sleep space and remove triggers that will remind you of work or other things that you're likely to worry about? So creating a space that is as quiet as you can make it. We can't remove all things that wake us up, small children being a classic example, but where there are things that you can remove from that space, it's good to do it. So think about that. A couple of key things that merge with this to make tip 3 for sleep is about your phone. Now, I always get into debates with people about this, so feel free to tell me why I'm wrong in the break or in the Q&A time. But it's surprising how much the presence of your phone for some people keeps your brain on a sort of low level of alert. And that needn't be nasty things. Remember, we think worry and we think bad. Actually, your brain just thinks things you might not want to miss. So particularly if you're somebody who loves to be on social media to keep track, you love the buzz and the vibrancy that offers you in your waking hours. If your phone's right next to your head and you're trying to sleep, somewhere in your brain, it might struggle to switch off. Was that a text? I wonder if they've replied to that message. Somewhere in your head, that's what's happening. Not everyone. Some people are able to have their phone right next to them, pinging and lighting up, and they're just sleeping away. But if that's not you, you might be surprised how much difference it makes from leaving your phone somewhere else, plugging it in downstairs. I, by the way, actually struggle from the fact that my husband took my advice and does that. So now when my daughter, who is nearly 18, is out late, he will wake me up to ask me if she's texted yet. I'm like, where's your phone? He's like, it's downstairs where you told me to leave it. This is not helping my sleep. But so number 3 might be leave your phone downstairs, or think about how your phone might interfere with your sleep. I will just say this quickly because I know it's controversial. I know there are lots of apps on phones to monitor sleep, and some people swear by them. Let me just tell you this. As a psychologist, I can tell you research again and again and again emphatically shows they are much more likely to make you struggle with sleep than to improve it. Because the more sleep is a strange thing. The more you think about it, the harder it is to do. And those apps do slightly make you worry about your sleep. Oh, I didn't sleep very well last night. What was I doing at 4 a.m? So I would just say that. The other thing is there's a weird thing about sleep, which some studies show that if you monitor someone's sleep with an app, but you fake the results, and you tell them they had a rubbish night's sleep, even when they actually slept fine, they will feel dreadful. And those apps aren't generally very reliable. Most of us move around a lot at night due to a hotel booking mix-up not so long ago. I had to share a bed with my daughter. I swear she did not sleep a wink. I certainly didn't. But she didn't remember anything the next morning. She was all over the place all night. If she used a sleep app, it would tell her she didn't sleep at all. She has no problems with sleep. So just be careful. It might make you feel bad about something that you actually don't need to be worrying about. And let's face it, there's enough that you should be worrying about. Otherwise, why would we be here? So I'm going to leave that there. Number 4 on the short 5 and 5 about sleep is it is a time when things might bounce to the top of your head. Sometimes that's quite helpful. I remember random things about speaking engagements I said I'd do and have forgotten about, or important things that I've forgotten to do, or my son's football kit, or whatever it is. If you don't have a place to put those things that gets them out of your head, your brain again will try and keep bouncing them into your working memory, and they might keep you awake. So a notepad by the bed. If you're not one of those people who's affected by your phone, you can write it on your phone. But don't get up, walk downstairs, write it on your phone, and then come back, because then you're awake and it's all messed up. But think about, is there a way you can offload those random thoughts so that you don't have to be worrying about them? Think about things like alarms, setting alarms if you've got to get up the next morning. You know that thing where you have to get up early and you're so busy worrying about sleeping through your alarm that you don't sleep? Really ironic. And then you fall asleep like 10 minutes before. But think about things like that. Can you release your mind from some of the things that it feels like it has to hold? And then number 5, most of all, break the cycle. If you can't sleep, and you know your frustration or your anxiety is rising, don't just lie there fuming, checking the clock, just so you can make sure you're keeping a really good eye on your gradual demise of your night's sleep, and just sit there thinking about how awful you're going to feel the next day. Just don't do it, it won't help. And actually, more than it not helping in the moment, what happens is your brain actually starts to view your bed as the place to do that. Like, bed is a really helpful place you can sit and think about everything that might go wrong in your life. This is not going to help your sleep. So if you're in that space, get up, do something else. Do something that distracts your mind. Go make a non-caffeinated drink. And then come back to bed when you feel your relaxation level is better, when you're feeling sleepy, and give it another go. Don't just lie there worrying. I would say overall, though, as a summary about sleep, there are lots of things that interfere with our sleep. But do you know what generally interferes with sleep most often for most people? It's procrastination. We just don't go to bed early enough. And once we're there, you sit there reading rubbish on the phone that you didn't plug in and leave downstairs, or reading your email, which always stresses you out, and then you can't sleep because you're thinking about work, or watching some box set, and then you absolutely have to watch all 6 episodes, and the next thing you know, it's 3 a.m. So just prioritize sleep. Do what you need to do to make your sleep better, because it will have a huge impact on your ability to do other things well if you're not sleeping well. So just think about that. Maybe there's some changes, some practical things that you need to do for sleep. Okay, to get back onto our main 5 things you can do about worry. Number 4, then, is to think about your focus. The problem with worry is how easily it dominates our attention, and can do that in a not very constructive way. One of the things about planning how you worry is you can try and channel that into something positive. You can make lists, you can make a plan, you can break up a big problem into smaller bite-sized chunks. You can set yourself a task and just do one each day. You can start to move things forward. If you just sit there worrying and worrying and worrying, very often nothing actually changes. It doesn't get you anywhere. So sometimes we need to redirect our focus, either like we've already talked about, so that we worry better, or to move it away from the things that are dominating our thinking. So here, distraction can be really good. So particularly when you're starting to practice worrying better, you've got your slot later where you're going to think about this and do it really well. You've got the friend coming around, they've got the notepad ready, you're going to make a list, it's all going to be good. But what do you do till then? Because you're not going to think about it, but you mustn't try not to think about it, because that's not helpful. So you need to do something positive instead. Replace that space with something positive. That's where distraction is brilliant. Find something that occupies your mind in some way. Sometimes the things we can do, though, we can play some extra tricks that will help. Let me tell you about a few extra tricks. Number 1, do something that restores order to something. So uncertainty is difficult for human beings, so is feeling out of control. So I know it seems strange, but if you can restore order to something, you will feel better about everything. It just kind of works. And also, you can quite often get an annoying job done that you need to get done. So I don't know what works for you. Pair your socks, tidy a drawer. My worst day in lockdown, I sorted out my spice drawer. It didn't solve the pandemic, but it did make me feel a lot better. And who knew I had so much cumin? I did not need to buy any more. So think, could I restore order somewhere? Do the ironing. I know a lot of you are like, Kate, you're just listing my most hated tasks. I don't know what works for you. Restoring order can really, really help. My most hated would be a puzzle, because I just don't understand why you would do that to yourself, but I know many people love them. But think, what are the things that you could do that are about bringing order and calm to something in your world, because it will help you feel better about the things that you actually can't control or bring order to. So that's number one. Number two is do something that triggers endorphins. Endorphins are your brain's happy hormones. They just make you feel better. They're designed to help you to think more clearly and feel more calm in the face of crisis or difficulty. So why would we not harness those just in everyday general life right now? They have a really useful function. And they're particularly good for dropping your anxiety level, helping you to relax. So the classic thing to trigger endorphins is exercise. Everybody's like, oh, she's listing more things I don't want to do, sorry. If you're wondering, how much, can I get away with just, walking down the road to the coffee shop? Generally, the advice would say, at least 45 minutes. You'll probably need to break a bit of a sweat. So if you're holding a coffee and not spilling it, you're probably not walking fast enough. Sorry. I thought having the dog would be great for this, but it turns out they spend a lot of time sniffing things and you never really get into your stride. It's quite frustrating. Maybe that comes later. But so exercise is really good. There are other things, though, good news, other things that trigger endorphins. Anything that you spend time with people, the right people, not the annoying people, they do not trigger endorphins, a whole other set of hormones. But so fun times with people you feel relaxed with, who get you, the good people and the good spaces, that will trigger endorphins. So a really good evening with people you love. Particularly things that bring people together in some way. So the classic thing here is to go and join a choir. This has become very popular recently. And the reason is because it really does make you feel better. It triggers endorphins, something about the mass group of people all doing the same thing, pulling together. It does trigger endorphins, so it's a good thing to do. Team sports are also good. They trigger a very similar effect. So things that bring people together in some way. The other thing is awe, A-W-E, anything that triggers awe. So awe is that wow feeling when you look at something and it just really moves you. It's quite a difficult experience to describe. It's that moment where you feel like you're part of something bigger. And there's many ways you can trigger awe. That's one of the reasons that singing in a choir or joining an orchestra helps, because you become part of this amazing, big musical moment. And all these people together, that's awe. Awe could also be staring at the night sky. One of my friends sent me the other night, that was that night recently where you could see all the planets? Yeah, well, we couldn't because I didn't know what they were. So we spent quite a lot of the time staring at the sky and sort of saying, well, that could be Pluto, but I actually don't know. Is it a plane? I think it might be moving. So one of my friends sent me that app where you can hold your phone up and it tells you what they all are. So now if you see me walking the dog, I am literally walking along. I'm going to walk into a skip or something. It's amazing. So trigger awe. Go to the top of a hill, find a beautiful view, look at the sunset. Or all these things you're like, I don't have time. I struggle with my health. I can't get out because I'm looking after my kids. Do you know what? Find somewhere you can see the sky. Watch the clouds go past if they're not just a big blanket of grey like it's been recently. Go and stand under a tree. Listen to the sound of the rain if it's raining, which it's January, it may well be. But there are easy ways to trigger awe, and it's amazing how it helps. So trigger endorphins. The next thing is do something that helps you to relax. So it distracts you, but it also helps you relax. So very often, there's a particular type of person, maybe you know that person, whose instinct to worry is so good that if you send them off to do something relaxing, what they generally do is use that time to worry. Do you know people like that? So my husband, who, if he's watching this, hello, dear, sorry to use you as an example so much, but hey, it's your topic. If you put him in a bath with nothing to do, he will literally just lie there and worry. He comes out, like rabbit in headlights because he's thought of so many things and he hates it because there's so many things he should be dealing with and I have made him lie in a bath for 20 minutes and it's just... So what I've learned is that one small thing transforms his experience of that space. The radio with the test match on. I don't get that because I don't understand why listening to the test match is so absorbing, but suddenly he can lie there for hours, and it's a relaxing space. So what's your thing? Do you need to combine things that occupy your mind with something that's relaxing? The classic example here is hobbies, crafts, playing musical instruments. I heard Michelle Obama on Radio 4 the other day saying that knitting got her through the pandemic. We've got knitters in the room. My daughter says it's very cool now. Not to me because I can't do it, but knitting, crocheting, cross-stitch, whatever it is that you do, these things are good because they occupy our minds, but they're also relaxing. And hey, they're also productive. It's not restoring order, but it's producing something which helps your brain feel like it's getting somewhere. So it's good for you. So think about what helps you relax and make space for it. But the final thing I would suggest for focus is a more general one. Did you know that your mind has a negative bias? I know some people in particular are like this, but our mind is biased to spot the negative, to remember the negative, to focus on the negative for reasons that I've already explained. And when there's plenty of negative for it to spot, it can kind of have a field day just jumping from one negative thing to another. Sometimes we need to redress the balance. We need to focus on something that's positive. Now, this isn't about denying that the negative is happening. It's not like, la, 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 everything is great. There's a lot in the press these days in the popular sort of social media space about gratitude, and a lot of it makes me want to punch people quite a lot. That may just be my problem. But what I'm saying to you is you don't have to pretend that your problems are not there. It's about balancing that out. And trying to redirect your mind sometimes to think about good stuff that I promise you is there. It's just that your thinking capacity is limited, and if you're using it all to worry, you don't have any left to spot the good stuff that you might just walk past and not notice. So redress the balance. This is Paul's advice from one translation of his letter. He says, I love this, friends, he says, I'd say you'll do best by filling your minds and meditating on things that are true, noble, reputable, authentic, compelling, gracious, the best, not the worst, the beautiful, not the ugly, things to praise, not things to curse. When's the last time you listened to the news and it sounded like that? When's the last time at the end of a day you thought, how did I do today? And you did that to yourself. Things to praise, not things to curse. We are so much better at beating ourselves up with the one thing we did wrong than we are at spotting the 99 things that we did that were actually pretty good. What are the things to praise about yourself? How would it change your worry and your well-being if you intentionally made space to think about those things? When you get together with that friend, when you've scheduled the hour, sometimes it's good to put that aside, to worry, to focus on the difficult things. But sometimes it's good practice to say, actually, let's think about something that's good now. Tell me a good news story. To share with someone else something you think they've done really well and then get them to do the same back to you. Let's practice that more and practice boosting those things in our minds. Because otherwise it is all too easy to get to that space that Paul tells us not to, where we do feel torn apart. because of our negative bias and because of the negative bias in spaces like social media. One of the things that I noticed from having the puppy, you get these adverts that pop up on your social media feed. I don't know how it knew, but suddenly all mine are about dogs. And I never knew there were so many ways I might accidentally kill the dog. I literally never knew all these things I should be worrying about. And my phone is now reminding me about them every day repeatedly. Sometimes we have to balance that and remember, I have had the dog now, by the way, for nearly 6 months, and he's still alive. That's good. That is a good outcome. So redress the balance sometimes. Direct your mind from worry to the wonderful, because you won't need to remind it to worry, but you might need to remind it to think about the wonderful. Okay, we are nearly done. Last thing, number 5, is this. Do we need to recognize and become better at being okay with the fact that we do have limits, that we are not perfect people, that we cannot hold everything, prevent everything that's bad, get everything right to happen? Our culture again and again puts pressure on us to become super people. The way our social media works is we zoom in on unusual and specific people who are doing something so amazing in one aspect of their life, and we look at that and think, oh man, I'm such a mess. But that's just one aspect of their life. The rest could be a complete mess like yours. But we don't see that. We see the one thing they're doing really well. Or like young people, it's a well-recognized fact that most, particularly young people, they'll take hundreds of photos and then select one to put on social media. So we're looking at the 1 out of 100 that looked okay. The rest were a bit dodgy. We're sharing, those social media things that will say like, oh, I'm having the most wonderful day. Friend bought me flowers, having a coffee, dog is civilized, blessed. That's probably just the churchy social media if you're not on there. And I'm like, okay, well, my dog is like the Hound of the Baskervilles. Nobody bought me flowers for a long time. I dropped the coffee cup and broke it, and it was my favorite. I do not feel blessed today. In those moments, we have to be careful about comparison and the pressure that we put ourselves under. Because if what you're aiming at is perfection, your brain will have to get you to worry a lot because you're not going to achieve it. And your brain's job is to warn you when something you're aiming at might not happen, so what it will do is make you worry. The more aspects of your life you put yourself under that pressure, and the more you're going to struggle with worry. Sometimes we feel like we are supposed to be perfect at everything. We're supposed to be the perfect employee, the perfect parent, the perfect friend, the perfect daughter or son. We're supposed to be perfect at everything. We're supposed to have done our 3 sets of 45-minute exercise or whatever it is that we're supposed to be doing, eating our 5 fruit and veg a day, not eating all these other things, or are we supposed to eat them because the advice changes all the time and it's just hard to know what you're supposed to do. And the more you're putting yourself under that pressure, the more you're going to worry. Do you need to release yourself from that? Paul says at the end of his letter, he says, I've learned to be content whatever the circumstances. I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I've learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, living in plenty or in want. Some of that is about releasing ourselves from a belief that we should have been able to solve everything and saying, actually, we don't have to be super people. We don't have to do everything. I want to say to you tonight, you don't need to fear your frailty. Yes, there will be some things that you haven't done so well. Some things you're doing brilliantly will limit how well you can do other things. You can't do everything all the time as well as you would like to do it. Don't fear that frailty. Actually, what if that's okay? What if your goodness, your value, the reason people love you, what if that doesn't come down to doing everything brilliantly? What if you could release yourself and your friends and your loved ones from that kind of pressure? None of us in this room are superheroes. None of us have it all figured out. I don't stand here talking to you about worry because I never do it. I'm human just like you are. We all have our struggles. Do you have spaces where you can be just human, where you can let that hang out, where you don't need to pretend to be perfect anymore, where you can share every detail of your life, not just the ones that you put on Instagram, and be honest and offload that sort of stuff? And ultimately, as I finish, what Paul is talking about throughout his letter as well is the value in finding a space that's outside of yourself. So often our worries come down to a basic problem like, what if I've reached my limit? What if I'm at the end of myself, the edge of my capacity, the edge of my creativity, the edge of my ability just to control and change things? What if some things just sometimes go wrong? By the way, they do. That's really tough. People get ill. Things don't go well. Accidents happen. There are things that you can't control or solve. The question is, when you reach the end of yourself, is that the end? And whether Paul's faith is your faith or not, another thing that comes out again and again and again in studies is spirituality and spiritual practice helps us manage pressured, tough times better. Why? Because we're handing something over to somewhere that's outside of ourselves. So those practices are really valuable, whether that's prayer, meditation, things like mindfulness that teach you just to hold your worries kind of without worrying about them, which sounds like an impossible thing to do. But it's the ability to step back on things and just let them be and accept that not everything is perfect, not everything is something that you can solve. Understanding that maybe there are powers that influence things that are beyond you. And sometimes through prayer, being able to hand those over in a positive way. Sometimes just being able to step back therefore and realize I am not the person who has to hold everything. So how can you do that? Some of these practices are helpful in all the things I've already talked about. How do you create and schedule space to worry? You create an environment that is about that. Light a candle, make a cup of tea when you sit down with a friend, something that labels that space as this is what it's for. This is going to be a moment, a special moment where I do something that's really helpful. And then at the end as well, those signs help us switch off and walk away from our worry because we've blown the candle out, we've finished the cup of tea. We're going to do it again tomorrow, next week. But for now, we can release ourselves from it, hand it over, and walk away. The ritual and the rhythm of that helps your brain practice and trust and relax so it doesn't need to keep bugging you all the time with the thing that you're trying to forget. So I'm going to finish. Let's just pause before we go on, and we're going to have a break and you can get another drink. Yes, Ali's nodding. You can get another drink. That's not permission, just confirmation that it's factually possible. We don't need Ali's permission to get a cup of coffee. But let's just pause before you go back to the busyness and chatting. Let's just pause. Maybe there's something you need to process from what I've said. Maybe there's one thing. Hopefully, maybe there's more than one. But one thing in particular that's caught you, that's resonated with you, a change you need to make, something you need to do, something you need to be intentional about, someone you need to talk to, a practice or a rhythm. I'm going to pray, because that's what I do as a church leader. But if that's not your practice or your spirituality, that's fine. Use the space just to pause and ponder, take some breaths and think. So my prayer for us in this room tonight is that this would be a space where we can feel a sense of release. And Lord, I just ask that you would bless the people in this space with everything that we're holding. All the worries, all the anxieties, all the things that we can't solve, all the things that we don't know what to do with, all the things we wish we could stop thinking about. And just in this moment, maybe there's something you want to symbolically in your mind just step away from and release just a little bit. And I pray that God would enable that. And that a peace beyond human understanding might be the thing that you take away with you this evening. Something that enables you to release, to let go, to breathe, to feel the weight lifted. I just ask that in Jesus' name. Amen.